You're listening to The Watchers, a show where two women from opposite ends of New Jersey watch movies and TV about New Jersey. We find ourselves at the beginning of a new series in our little show.
We're beginning a series about beginnings, Andrea.
That's beautiful, Jodie.
Thank you so much.
It's pilot
very
season.
Poetic and tired this morning.
It's pilot season here at The Watchers.
Yes.
I love television pilots. Oh, should we start with our quick don't actually us disclaimer?
Yeah, please.
We're using the word pilot to mean first episode. I know that TV pilot is the thing that is the thing that is produced and made for a potential TV series. Oftentimes, the first episode we as viewers see is that pilot, but it's not always.
Don't entertainment-splain to us, please. Yeah. We're just using a shorthand here.
Exactly. So we watched...
Actually.
Exactly. We watched a pilot that is 100% a pilot.
We sure did.
With a pilot.
Oh, it's no.
A pilot with a pilot.
Oh, no.
And it's called Pilot. It's like Patterson.
So like Patterson.
It's exactly like Patterson. What did we watch, Jodie?
Is this the best day of your life?
It's the best day of my life.
I feel like your whole when you started producing podcasts 5 years ago, if I had told you, even though I didn't know you, that you were going to be recording a podcast about the pilot of Lost, how excited would you have been?
Just the most. I've been threatening to start a Lost podcast
You still could. It just wouldn't be with me.
Day one.
I'm not doing it.
And I think I'm too close to that show to be able to do a full.
Or it would be a podcast that went on for 17 years
Truly.
Because you would just you'd be able to cover 15 minutes of an episode at a time.
That's a great idea, actually.
No, it's not. Maybe it is. I don't know.
Yeah,
I couldn't do it.
I have a truly unhinged idea for a Lost podcast that I'm not going to say here, but maybe I'll tell you off mic. I want to do so badly.
Does it have to do with the numbers?
I'll tell you off mic what
okay.
What my plan is.
I can't wait.
The numbers. Do you wait, don't look at anything. Do you know the numbers off the top of your head?
I do not.
Oh, 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42?
The only numbers that I know like that are the apertures of a camera.
And the only ones I know are Lost. So we both have really useful skills.
Yeah. Well, mine is useful.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's the juxtaposition of yours being useful and mine being for a TV show that is 20 years old in just a few months.
Wow, you're right.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
2004. As I was watching this, I know this isn't the point of us watching this, but as I was watching this, all I could think about was what was life like in 2004?
Yeah.
And when this came out, what were we all doing? You and I were doing very different things because I'm old, but
I was 3 months out of high school.
Oh my God.
September 2004. I was working at a video store.
Hell yeah.
And I didn't watch the first season as it aired. I didn't start until until season 2.
Yeah.
Because one of my coworkers at the video store who worked on the game side and they could do whatever they wanted because they had a different manager, was watching the first season. And I would just go stand in there for hours because my video store was very quiet. And during the week, we would go hours without a customer. And I would just stand in the middle of that section of our store and just watch Lost. And I binged the whole first season that way.
Just you, the guy in the corner from Blair Witch, just watching.
kind of exactly like that.
Just watching Lost.
And then my friends and I all got into it. And it was total appointment television. And we would meet at my one friend's house and watch it in his parents' basement. And we did that every week for the full 6 seasons of this show until, I remember so clearly watching the finale, and I remember episodes where I would crying so hard, just all of us weeping in the basement. This show means everything
not Penny's
to
boat.
me.
Yeah, I know.
You can't jump scare Not Penny's Boat at me. Sorry. I wasn't prepared for that.
Sorry. No, I know. 2004. So the reason I thought about the time frame partly was just because of some of the references in the show itself. But the Saeed and the plane and, 3 years post 9/11, all that hysteria that we were going through.
3 years. We were still.
That anti-Muslim. Not that we don't have that problem now.
But it was.
it exploded.
Mm-hmm.
No, ooh, that was bad. Never mind. But so in 2004, I lived in New York City from 99 to the end of 2005, beginning of 2006. And so I was there during 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
I was working in the city in Midtown. And by 2004, I was like so ready to leave the city. And I was in this like weird transition period in my life. So Lost spans for me.
Oh, yeah. It's like,
it's the first major transition in my life where like post-college, I had been working in the city as a graphic designer for like 7 years. I hated my life. I didn't hate my life. I hated my job. And so in 2005, I like ditched everything, joined AmeriCorps and moved to Rhode Island. And and I didn't really have a group of friends that were obsessed with this show. I just liked it. It was one of those, like, as I was watching the pilot and thinking about the way that the series changed, and I know we're really talking about the pilot, but it reminded me of like how, because I did watch the first season as it aired, and I was really into it. And the first season was when I was working still in an office. And so I would be on like bulletin boards and things like that the first season, because that's what I did during my work hours when I didn't want to do my actual work. I would just sit on the internet and either research like swing dancing or Lost.
or the many hidden. We were still at a point where we didn't all have laptops that we brought everywhere with us. Like, I don't go anywhere without my computer anymore. And also my phone is a computer.
Yes.
But so my friend's family still had an old, big, clunky desktop in the basement. And this genuinely Lost is how I became such a good internet sleuth, because after the show would finish, everybody would hang out in the basement and I would run over to the computer and just start Google. I don't even know if I was Googling. Was I Googling in 2004?
No, you probably weren't.
Looking up everything.
Were you asking Jeeves? You might have been asking Jeeves.
I literally may have been asking Jeeves.
Yeah.
It might be why I still talk to Google like it's Jeeves, because it's ingrained from all the Lost research.
Yeah.
And just spending all week.
Yeah.
Just figuring out as much as I could. And then when the show realized how much fans were invested in that, they just kept layering it on. And then there would be things like, if you haven't watched the whole series, we're going to be we're not going to be super spoiler heavy, but you probably, if you're precious about spoilers.
Yeah, if you're like a total purist, we're not going to be like, oh, and then this is how this ended, and this is how this ended. But like, you know, we can't totally censor things we know that happen later.
We're 20 years out. And so like the thing of like, sometimes like there were commercials that aired in the commercial breaks for Lost that were real commercials for real products that had hidden Lost clues in them. Like it was like phone numbers you could call. It was you have to understand, for folks who maybe have not watched Lost but are watching Yellowjackets with us, why I'm so insane about it's like details.
One of the first shows that like asked for that kind of internet engagement. Like
totally.
So I was working my first post-college job, and I was, like I said, in graphic design. I was sitting at a computer all day, every day, 8 hours a day, which I found out later as someone with late diagnosed ADHD is probably bad for me. And so instead of doing the work that I was being paid to do, I was literally all day. I had a computer in front of me with an internet connection in 2004, 2005. And so I was just researching like where to go dancing and what the fuck was happening on Lost. Like those were my two main work related or unrelated activities. I had my own office, and so nobody really
could even see you
up behind me. Yeah.
It's just like, now we're getting a little in the weeds here, but because I do want us to focus on the pilot, that's the point.
Sure, but I think thinking about the broader context is super interesting, because it's such a time capsule in a way.
And just like the alternate reality gamification of shows, and like some shows have tried to do it since. Yeah. But like I just remember like again, just digging deep through blogs and watching these commercials and dialing phone numbers and fake websites and stumbling upon stuff, and like it just was so unique.
It was also during the golden age of TV recap blogs.
Totally.
Where, like, every episode there would be like, you know, many thousand word recap, like detailed recap of every single episode. And like that still exists, but it's not the like phenomenon that it was.
Right. And it's not the like I would go read every single one of them. Like I don't
now
do
it's
that.
Podcasts.
Yeah, exactly. And so I maybe we should back up a little bit. 6 seasons, September 22nd, 2004 through May 23rd, 2010. Focuses on the survivors of Oceanic Flight 815. They crash on a mysterious island in the South Pacific, and we follow them as they figure out how to survive. One of the big, like, unique, interesting elements of the show is that you find out about the characters' backstory little by little through a series of flashbacks across the course of all 6 seasons. Show is both celebrated and criticized for how intricate and complicated its plot becomes. How
convoluted, one might say.
One might say that.
Maybe not you.
It sets up many, many questions, some of which will eventually get answered, some won't. It's also a show when you and I talk about, like, we're watching Yellowjackets, and is it magic?
Right.
Or is it trauma? Is it, you know, how much is this is fated? Fate versus free will, light
man
versus
of reason,
dark,
man of faith, all
like,
that, yes.
All of that. And not that, obviously, that conflict, that kind of dichotomy of kind of, you know, it's Cain and Abel. Like,
it's as old as time.
It's literally, but Lost is so invested in that. I mean, we see it in the pilot with the backgammon pieces. It's so heavy-handed. It's so heavy-handed.
I forgot about that scene. There's so much I forgot about.
He literally says, like, one side is light and one side is dark. So, you know, and then Charlie in the opening, in the first half of this 2-part pilot, literally has fate on his knuckles on that white, like, in black mark on the white tape. Like, it's so heavy-handed. But I think
it's interesting, though. So thinking about what, I just want to jump on one thing that you just said about, like, the trauma versus supernatural of it all. Like, I had forgotten, I don't know how, I forget a lot of things, apparently. Like, I was watching this show, and every time something happened, I would anticipate it about 2 seconds ahead of time, but had forgotten it existed at all. So it was like, every time I was like, oh yeah, the bathroom, right, he hides, okay, like, as it was about to happen. But in thinking about the series as a whole, which I know we're only really focusing on the pilot, but in thinking about the supernatural versus trauma of it all, I think Yellowjackets is still attempting to make everything explainable in either direction.
Which I think...
Lost abandoned, I think, at a certain point.
Well, it's almost like I mean,
there's a smoke monster.
Well, yeah, and I think that what's funny is they kind of go it's almost like they sort of I'm working this out as you're saying that.
Yeah.
So almost in the opposite direction, because I'm watching this pilot and I've watched it so many times. You made fun of me yesterday because I said I haven't watched it in a few years.
Yeah.
It's regular rotation for me.
Right.
But what I had forgotten was how supernatural some of the stuff feels in the pilot.
Right away.
And in my head, I was like, oh, it's this thing where it could be either or for a long time. And then you start thinking again, this is where I'm going to generally spoil. Then you start thinking, oh no, there's nothing supernatural about what's going on here. It can all be explained away. And then by the time you get to the end of the series, all fucking bets are off. It's a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Which I think is why I'm so open to Yellowjackets being what the fuck ever it wants to be.
And because why some of us who are disappointed at the end of Lost are not.
Totally.
Because we're like, fucking answer the question.
But I'm kind of like this. We're calling it the smoke monster. The Lost survivors don't call it that yet. But the way that it looks, it's invisible in these first 2 parts. But you see the way the trees are being pulled down around it. You can, when Greg Grunberg, when the pilot gets ripped out of the plane, it's from a high point. I remember early on thinking like, it could literally be dinosaurs.
Yeah.
This could be
I mean, we do see a polar bear in this episode.
Exactly. So fucking funny.
In the pilot. Yeah.
God, I love the polar bear. I love the polar bear. Do you know the behind the scenes?
No. I know nothing. Even if I did know it, Andrea, it is so gone from my brain.
That polar bear is part animatronic. It's also part, I forget who, but somebody on the crew just wearing big fuzzy white pants and running.
Amazing.
So a lot of the stuff in this, and man, 20 years old, it still looks, 20 years old network TV, it still looks so good.
It looks good. There were a few moments where I was like, oh, green screen.
But
that's
like,
a green screen. But like, yeah, no.
But for
overall,
2004,
agreed.
I mean, it was the most expensive pilot ever shot until Boardwalk Empire. It's like $12 million.
And most of Boardwalk Empire was just paying off Jersey people to film.
I think Boardwalk Empire is $18 million, so it's like a lot more expensive.
And that all went to some guy named Tony. Come on.
It's very good. And so it should look good. Like but the fact that it looks so good because so much of it is, there is some CGI. There's a lot of digital stuff, but a lot of it is practical.
Yeah. And
so that's just gonna like if you can do practical effects well, they're just gonna hold up longer.
Yes. And so, yeah, that is one of the things that I remembered. So I, unlike you, do not watch this pilot every few years. I watched the entirety of this show as it happened, followed along, and then never watched it again. And so my main memory when we started talking about pilots.
What a fascinating show to try to remember if you've only watched it once.
Exactly. It's like a test.
Nuts.
It's like a test.
Truly.
And I'm failing. But the main thing I remembered about the pilot was the beach scenes, the early crash beach scenes with the smoke and the fires and the giant plane carcass and people stumbling around and Jack heroically
so chaotic
helping people. Yeah. And so like that's sort of like epic set piece is what really is the thing that when you say pilot of Lost, that's what I think of.
Right. Well, and
I didn't think about anything else other than that.
It's so funny because we get a lot of
we get more in the pilot than I remembered by far.
And the fact that we get anything when there are so many like main characters to juggle, and we get introduced to so many more as the show goes on, obviously.
Yeah.
We're already juggling a good half dozen or more people who have like speaking lines and names in these first couple of episodes,
and they're the ones that are going to stay important too.
Yeah. We're not going to do a beat for beat, but I think talking about that scene that you're talking about and the lead into it is probably important because it's so iconic. And we were talking off mic, like I don't have any off the top of my head at this moment, but so many shows do the eye-opening close up thing. And so we open on Jack's eye with that overhead shot, which immediately made me think of when Van comes back to life in Yellowjackets.
Yeah.
And with the trees overhead and all. And then we get our white rabbit who's Vincent. It's like immediate Alice in Wonderland kind of thing. And then in my head, like I said, it'd been a few years. If you had asked me to describe this pilot, I would be like, and it's so cool because like once he wakes up, it's like a single shot. It's like a one take, one shot through the first couple of minutes. It's not.
No.
But it's so well choreographed and so thoughtful in how it moves that it does kind of feel that way.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that too. In my mind, he had woken up on the beach, not in the woods. Which, because again, I've compressed this whole pilot into like one scene in my head.
That reveal is incredible.
Yeah, because he hears the screaming and then turns and sees it all. I mean, it definitely like we're coming from Yellowjackets. You can't not think about the scene after the plane crash when they're all stumbling around and people are just chaotically bleeding and yelling and smoking.
It's so interesting, too, to think about, like, Jack is absolutely our main character through. And then I think you can kind of decide as the series goes on who your main character is.
Right.
And everybody is sort of fighting for their own place as the main character. But his name's Jack fucking Shepard.
I know.
Like, he is our main character.
Yeah.
And they do such a good job of focalizing the action through him, but in a way that shows us who everybody is to some degree. Like, he's obviously he's in triage, right? He has to be. He jumps right into it. But just that I think you already mentioned this off mic, but that Michael is immediately screaming for Walt. That made me laugh out loud, but it's like, that's all you need to know about Michael. There's Michael. Like, Shannon screaming helplessly.
This makes no sense, but my notes are so unhinged. I wrote, I forgot all this. Running through the woods, playing on beach. How is the fan still going? Walt! Just like...
But that's everything you need to know about him.
Yeah. And it's not a fan, it's a fucking, like, plane engine, but the fact that it's still going for a while.
It's a chicken with its head cut off situation, just long enough to give us one of my favorite moments in any show ever, when he gets sucked into that engine.
To the propeller.
Oh, it's so funny.
It's not a propeller either. It's an engine. I don't know planes.
You don't know planes. You don't need to. No. And the other thing that I love about Lost, that I love about Yellowjackets, is how it gets us really comfortable with really dark, tense stuff, but also humor at the very same time.
Yeah.
So we get a couple of jokes up top that I love. When Boone is giving Rose, she's not named in the pilot, but that's Rose, and I have throughout my notes, Rose, my love, Kate, my love. Every time I see somebody, Charlie, my love. I love everybody so much on this show.
The first time that happened to me when people started showing up was Rose, to be fair. Like, Rose and Bernard are just like...
God, I love them so much.
Just the personification of, like, purity.
But even, like, Sawyer, who is detestable.
He's horrible in the beginning. I forgot how much I hated him.
And, like, he stays really complicated throughout.
Yeah.
But even just seeing him, I'm like, oh, my love. Like, I just love all of you so much. But Boone is doing bad CPR on Rose, and Jack tries to correct him, and he's like, I'm a lifeguard, I'm licensed. And he's like, you probably like give back that license. But he says, like, he's like, should we do the hole in her neck thing?
Yeah.
And Jack's like, yeah, good idea. Go get me a pen.
Go get me a pen.
Like, it's really,
and then that pays off later when he comes back with like 6 pens.
And Jack's really sweet to him though. He's like, they're all good. Like, Jack, I really like Jack. I actually like him less as the series goes on. I think he gets kind of frustrating, but I forgot just how sweet and like lovely he is in the pilot. He's just so good. Like, genuinely interested. Like, he's always asking people questions about their like, his bedside manner is perfect. Just asking people questions about their lives, and that he and Kate are I'm team Jack and Kate because I want Sawyer and a later love interest. They're for them. And so I've never felt
conflicted
I'm with you on that. About that love triangle.
Yeah. One thing in this scene one of the things I think that's interesting about watching these pilots now is how they connect not just to Yellowjackets, but to other things we've watched, and that sort of lineage of this style of TV and movie. But one very specific thing I noticed, and this is not just a Lost and Yellowjackets thing, but the way that the timing of it. Did you connect them pulling the guy out from under the plane in his squished leg?
Yeah, I said Coach these shows love a gross leg.
I was like, it's in my notes.
They love to crush a leg.
Yeah.
Totally.
Except instead of Jack, an actual medical doctor, we have Misty, babysitter, first aid training graduate.
It's like the Muppet Babies of Lost, Yellowjackets. Obvious differences now. We're not, I don't think anybody is expecting us to be the most organized show. That's not our strong suit. But just obvious difference. It's interesting to think about the fact that the Yellowjackets crew, like, we find out about who they all are in conjunction with each other and what their backstories are and their mysteries in their lives, but they all know everything about each other because
they're not strangers.
And so like kind of the big thing for Lost is like, who are these people on the island, who they are off, how much of them are lying about who they are, how much of them are using this as like a chance to change who they are.
Yeah.
They're not. There are a lot of Misties who are like not in any hurry to go back to the real world.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think that, like, even from the pilot, the big thing that I remembered was how immediately distrustful you start to feel of everyone and their motivation, because
other than like Jack and other than Jack, I think you're like, what?
Well, and the Kate reveal helps this too, because you're like, she's the other person at first that you have no suspicions of, because she's just like a nice lady that's like helping him stitch up his back, and then you find out she's the actual criminal, and you're like, oh, so none of these people can be trusted.
Right. Miss Lady who pretends like she doesn't know how to use a gun. And it's
although she grabbed it from a Sawyer very swiftly and smoothly. Yeah.
She's also, I'm so sorry, this cast is so beautiful.
They're all so perfect.
I know that that's a problem with TV in general, but I do think we've gotten a little bit better, but it is just like, everyone is stunning. And the only one who's not stunning, frustratingly, that's like his major character trait is poor Hurley.
I know.
like even just
adorable. I will say that out of this main cast, to me, the least attractive one is Jack. Because he's just a fucking mannequin robot person. Like
I love him though. Matthew Fox in general is whatever. Like he's fine. He's like you said, he's a mannequin. He looks like a man, whatever.
Yeah.
But I just think he's so lovely in these first few episodes that I'm just in love with him. He is,
but I never was. I think because I knew him, was Party of Five before this?
Yeah.
Okay. I knew him as the like sort of uptight, annoying older brother from Party of Five.
Funny.
And I can't see beyond that.
I understand that.
What year was Party of Five?
Do we have the same I have two loves of my I love everybody on this show, but my two absolute loves of my life.
One of them we definitely have in common.
And then for me it's Kate. But my number one forever and ever and always is I think Saeed. He's perfect. He is
the most beautiful man in this show.
So beautiful. And he's also, when he's like, anytime he's
funny
explaining something to anybody ever on the show, I'm like, oh, you're so capable and you'd be a lovely teacher. And like, he's so perfect.
Did you watch The Dropout, the Elizabeth Holmes movie?
Yeah, it's a bummer. What did they do to him?
You gotta try hard to make that man unattractive. And they really tried.
Yeah.
It made me very sad. I did not recognize him at first. I was like, that can't be Saeed. Like, Saeed
he's also
hot.
20 years older.
I know, but God.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen photos of him recently not dressed up as Sunny Balwani, and he looks amazing still.
He's everything to me. Everybody is everything to me.
But yeah, Saeed in this first episode is like, A, beautiful, B, competent, and C, like we mentioned, in terms of time frame, they're really playing into the sort of racism that happened towards Muslim Americans after 9/11, and like complicating it by Saeed having been in the Iraqi Republican Guard.
Yeah, I love that little.
It wasn't just like a.
We're like, well, he's one of the like quote unquote. He, you know what I mean? Like we like play on the stereotype, but you're really going to find out that like he was raised in the States and his,
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, I really, and you see that immediate conflict with him and Sawyer, and Sawyer's sort of like the personification of like American racism in that moment.
I guess, again, Sawyer is difficult to like early on.
No, I found him very hard to like in this beginning part, watching it again. Like, I remember changing my tune on him later, but complete side note, just to jump back to Matthew Fox real quick. I really appreciate watching TV from the era before everyone had veneers.
I know.
He has normal, good teeth.
Yeah.
Like, they're mildly crooked. They're cute. They're like nice.
It makes his face a little more interesting.
Yeah, he looks like a person,
there would
but
be
like
nothing.
a handsome person. Yeah. No, I miss real teeth on people. Anyway, side note, but I literally wrote he's got good teeth.
I also, I want to make a blanket statement. I have done no research on any of these actors. So if any of these people have been canceled, so please know that if any of these people have been canceled and you know that, this is not an endorsement. We're probably on your side.
Yeah. So yeah, we have just sort of been like gushing over attractive people, but maybe we should also go through our the episode, or maybe like talk through some of the common questions we're going to get to. Where should we go from here?
Maybe that's worth talking about just quickly, are like, what are the big beats of this pilot? Like, what's introduced in the pilot? We have this big scene. We have a lot of little scenes. We won't go through all of them, that are kind of just there to mix it up, just to kind of give us what the different dynamics could be.
Right.
I think, right?
And I think we have little scenes for each major character that is doing a little bit of establishing, right? So Jack obviously has most of them, because we talked about how he's running around saving everybody. But then we see Boone being kind of a dumbass. We see Shannon being really selfish and uninterested and just being like, we're going to get rescued. Who else? We see Sawyer being suspicious and racist. We see Locke.
And giving everybody nicknames, which is his thing forever. Yeah. It's one of my favorite he's got a little character quirk. Yeah. And that's his. Hurley being the nice guy who's mostly concerned with food. Yeah,
there's some issues with some unexpected, or not unexpected, some expected issues with some portrayals in this. I think the portrayal of Sun and Jin is also something that is a little rough.
And it's funny because it's like all of these characters fit a kind. I found this. I'll link to it. I found a couple of really good articles, but one I found that was an early review. It was like you were saying, one of those recap podcast or blogs that was pretty small. Like, I don't think it wasn't like sponsored by any magazine or anything like that. It was just somebody's personal blog. Had a list of the characters we'd met so far. And I think that, like, just the way they're broken down, of somebody who in 2004 had only seen, I think maybe just the first episode, the first half of the pilot at this point. This might be the second half. Anyway, heroic doctor with issues, beautiful, so that Jack, obviously, beautiful heroine with a deadly secret, Kate, cokehead rock star, really nice fat guy.
Oh, God.
Nasty blonde hick. And then this is where I was, the Korean male chauvinist and his quietly rebellious wife.
Yep.
It's really on the nose. And so what happens is, becomes really, the payoff is great later when these things are troubled, or you find out why, and it's not as obvious. But it's like, yeah, but you set it up that way. Yeah. You gave us these characters who feel kind of flat. A heroic Arab who is clearly not a terrorist.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
So it's like
the estranged father who's having to reunite with his son, who he's neglected to be a part of his life. Also a black man.
Right.
Again,
right.
A little,
and it's like,
yikes.
It reminds me of that scene in The Office when Michael's like, picture a criminal. Close your eyes. Picture a convict. What's he wearing? Nothing special. Baseball cap on backwards. Baggy pants. He says something ordinary like, yo, that's shizzle. Okay. Now slowly open your eyes again. Who are you picturing? A black man? Wrong. That was a white woman. Surprised? Well, shame on you.
Oh my God.
Like, that's what I feel like is going on here a little bit.
I know.
It's like, he's like Jin. I would love to talk about Jin and Sun for a minute. We don't have to spend a lot of time on everybody.
Yeah.
But it's the way that it's like, well, most of the time when they're speaking Korean, we don't get subtitles. I think that's cool. I like that. But then the way they establish their characters is through like Jin slapping her hand away when she tries to help, and her having to like button up her cardigan, but then when he turns away, she unbuttons it because she's gonna. It's just like, guys, that for me is a real stumble.
It is, because it's like, does it have to be like, that dynamic could have been explored in a different couple without playing into racial stereotypes.
We also don't need it for just knowing their backstory.
Yeah,
they can have tension and problems that don't look so,
I know, like,
oof.
Yeah. Like, no, totally. I forgot how kind of cringy that part was in the beginning until I watched it again. Yeah, and we also, in terms of these establishing stereotypes, characters, whatever, we see Locke as the like mystical, mysterious older man sitting in the rain while everyone else is like, you know, sitting in the lotus position almost in the rain while everyone else is running for shelter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's our kind of like mystic already before we even really know what his deal is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think it's interesting thinking about Yellowjackets. In the first half of the pilot, we get them finding the pilot of the plane, finding the cockpit, and him saying, we were 6 hours in, the radio went off, we were 1,000 miles off course, they don't know where we are, we were turned around to try to land in Fiji. So we get like a loose sense of what happened, but not any details on how they crashed. And the same thing is true in Yellowjackets.
Yeah, we got a little more from Pilot Grunberg than we do
a little bit, but like,
not much.
It's still quite vague.
Just enough for us to be like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Yeah. And instead of the transmitter being smashed by a spiteful teenager, it just gives them the recording.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That recording, man, I remember so clearly the first time watching that, where it's just like,
no, it's another like random French speaking mysterious woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and somebody else who should be better at, who sucks at French, who has to try not to.
It's also our Jackie.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
having
Shannon.
One useful skill.
Yeah, being mediocre but acceptable at French.
Mm-hmm. And then our brilliant Saeed doing math so fast.
Oh, yeah,
just so fast. So smart. He's just the smartest.
He's so smart. And then the last bit of that first pilot, we get another. I mean, I know that we're not going to spend all of our time like doing Yellowjackets references because obviously Lost exists on its own as a more established classic show. But when I notice things that are this obvious, the guy in the tree.
I know. Yeah.
Coach Martinez
in the tree. What's up, Coach? Yeah.
And like the last line in that is like, in that half of the pilot is, how does something like that happen?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I'm like, well, he landed in the tree when he fell out of the plane, just like Coach Martinez did.
Or when the smoke monster ripped him out of it and tossed him there.
Exactly.
Or the dinosaur at the time, I really was like, visible dinosaur? I guess we've got invisible dinosaurs. Like,
I mean, it's not a crazy thought when you think about the way it's presented.
Mm-hmm.
What year did Jurassic Park come out? Because maybe we just had dinosaurs on the brain.
No, it's like 10 years younger. Hold on. I just Googled the
Jurassic
word dinosaur.
Park is 93.
Yeah.
But it had a very lasting impact. And there were more versions of it.
Well, even just like when, I think it's Jack, maybe it's Charlie, I think it's Jack, when he's in the cockpit, he like wipes off, he tries like wipe off some condensation on the window. And you half expect there to be a giant dinosaur eye, like in Jurassic Park with the Jeep. Totally.
Yeah.
You would not be surprised if you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's this kind of show.
Yeah, no, 100%. So I think I'm just looking at my notes from the second half from part 2. We get Charlie's backstory a little bit. We find out that he stashed the drugs in the bathroom, that he's an addict. We also see another, I mean, this is just a plane crash trope, but the drinks cart flying down the aisle at Charlie. I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah, if you're going to have a plane crash, you have to have that. You have to weaponize the drinks cart. Yeah. I
have another all caps Walt in my notes. And we find out more about Saeed. This is where we find out that he was an Iraqi soldier. I wrote, we're doing post 9/11 racism. We get the scene of Jin harvesting the urchin and trying to share with people and like pointing out the racism of like, you know, food practices. And
yeah, it's funny that Hurley he like manages to be likable in being food racist, where the way he kind of laughs about not eating it is like kind of good natured in a way where I'm like, all right, Hurley, you're the only one here. I'm gonna like get away with that a little bit.
And I mean, as a fan of the television show alone, Jin is being extremely smart because the ocean is your buffet if you know how to harvest it. We also get some poor parenting. When Michael just says to Walt, I'll get you another dog.
All right. Get you another dog.
We find out that, you know, Walt's mom died. He was living in Australia. Michael's been an absent father. Also, when they're climbing up to get to higher ground to use the transmitter, they're on like a sheer vertical face.
Mm-hmm.
This is like a movie about Everest, but in the jungle. There's no fucking way those people that just crashed in a plane are climbing a vertical cliff. I'm sorry.
This island there are many mysteries on this island, Jodie.
Yeah, and one is how they're suddenly like professional climbers.
Walt's comic book has a polar bear in it.
Oh, I didn't even catch that. I knew it was in Spanish. We also see a few other things. I wrote, man, they're setting up like a million mysteries, which they were. We hear the recording of the French lady. She says it killed them all. We find out that it's been going for 16 years and 5 months. And the last line of the episode is, guys, where are we?
Do you know
before this, I have to point this out. I remember now why I loved Hurley from the very beginning of this. Do you know why that is?
I mean, because he's perfect, but no, why? What specifically?
What characteristic of Hurley would I relate to? And you.
Oh,
he's a fainter.
He's not so good with blood.
He needed a lemon.
Isn't it?
Someone needed to give him a lemon.
Someone needed to give that man a lemon and he would have been fine.
I wrote it down. He needs a lemon.
Isn't it funny that Jack didn't bother to teach him how to count to 5?
That doesn't work with vasovagal syncope, Andrea.
Okay, I guess that's true. I mean, I've never tried it.
If it did, I would not have fainted so many times in my life.
Maybe I'll give it a shot.
Yeah. No, when he passes out from the blood, I was like, oh, Hurley, I know that feeling.
He really tries not to. Oh, Jack's like, don't look.
Yeah.
One of my favorite Jack traits is the way that he engages folks, though. That like when he is going on the hike and he gives Boone a little task because he knows Boone will listen, and he involves Hurley in the like. I don't know what it is about that, but I think it's really like Lost. One of the things Lost suffers from in general, and it's a thing that a lot of shows do, is like people refusing to rely on one another, even though Live Together, Die Alone is like, we're about to hear that, but everybody's bad at actually following that advice.
Right.
And everybody's keeping secrets from everyone that if they would just tell just a 5-minute conversation.
Yep.
So I think this aspect of Jack, I really like and find refreshing in a show where, nobody, when people work together, it's refreshing on Lost.
Well, and also, like, I think that even though we're saying that they are setting up some really, really generic stereotypes for these people, they do, like you said, take pleasure in, like, disrupting them as well. So, like, we find out in the same part of the same episode that Kate is the actual fugitive that's being taken by the marshal on the plane. We see her try to get out of her handcuffs when the plane starts going down and the marshal gets knocked out. So she grabs his keys. We think, oh, so she's this, like, sort of psychopathic or like desperate, whatever.
Right.
She puts the mask on herself, but she puts the mask on the marshal first, or not first, but right away.
But she does put him,
and she's the reason he survives the crash, because without that, I'm sure that he would have probably not. I don't know how air pressure works,
but either way, it would have been very convenient for her to make sure that, right.
Yeah, exactly.
I do think, too, though, just to give the show a little credit for the thing that I brought up as wanting to discredit it for with the characters, is that, like, this was network TV at a time when network TV was not good and also didn't trust its audience.
Yeah.
And so the fact that it was like that it gave us these stereotypes up front to be like, okay, now you can kind of settle in, like, to give you a handle on who these people are, but then wasn't afraid to trouble that is saying something.
I mean, it was 2004. TV was not like, we weren't watching all of these prestige shows with these really complex characters.
Well, and everything. I found a really cool, one of the things I want to talk about is I found a really great article a really great essay from one of the producers of Lost talking about the difference between procedural and serialized shows. And like procedural dramas are still king. Like to have a show where on network television that expected its viewers to be watching every single week and remembering from week to week and like keeping track across seasons was pretty rare. Now it's standard. I mean, especially now that streaming is and shows are not. That's the other thing. This first season is more than 20 episodes. Like they were still like a show like Lost today. It would be Yellowjackets. You'd get 8 to 10.
Right.
And so just the fact that they trusted their audience to keep up and that they got the freedom to do that, at least in this first season, is...
Well, and just to give a little time context for what we're talking about, like there's this time period that's like referred to as like the new golden age of television that Lost was a part of. And it's like the early 2000s into the 2010s. And so Sopranos was one of the first that's included in that, 1999. And then West Wing in 2001, 6 Feet Under in 2001, The Wire.
But all of these are HBO. None of these are network.
Yeah. The Wire in 2002. We've got like Deadwood, Lost, Friday Night Lights, Mad Men, Breaking Bad, Walking Dead. Some of these are prestige is a loose term, but Girls, Orange is the New Black, which is something that I thought of when, I don't know if you watched Orange is the New Black, but
I watched the first couple of seasons.
Okay. Yeah, it got crazy. But that show also had a lot of those huge ensemble cast with individual characters getting flashbacks to fill out their story in an episode in a similar way. Better Call Saul. Like there's just this list of these like quote unquote prestige TV shows, and Lost is one of the first in that list, only really preceded by Sopranos. They include 98 Sex and the City as sort of one of the kickoff moments, but The Wire. Did you watch The Wire?
I've seen episodes of it.
Yeah. I watched the whole thing. But yeah, so thinking about like what TV had been like up until the early 2000s gives a bit more context for the way that this was a break in the format or a part of an ongoing new break in format pioneered primarily by HBO. And so having this on network was a different way to kind of roll people into it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and so just on the back of what you just very helpfully set up for us, one of the producers of Lost is Javier Grillo-Marxuach, which comes trippingly off the tongue for me. But he wrote this. Just I thought it was so helpful in thinking about this show and thinking about a lot of the shows that we're going to talk about moving forward, because everybody talks about Lost as being like kind of revolutionary and really shifting the landscape, and a lot of it has to do with what you just talked about. But to put a really fine point on it, in 2014 he wrote an essay called "Finding the Next Lost: What is an Operational Theme and Why Don't I Have One?" So it's like advice for other writers. And so I just want to read a little bit of that, and you can feel free to jump in if you want. He says, it seems obvious and frankly inevitable that simple operational themes are the key to serialized success. He's going to define that for us in a second. And yet, by and large, most attempts at serialized, mythologized sci-fi, the genre Lost falls broadly under that broad category, I think. Maybe not in this first episode, but certainly serialized and mythologized. Fail to pull off this trick. Think of all the genre series that have this is so funny, that have attempted to capitalize on the serialized mystery, heavy mythology vogue triggered by Lost. Ready for the shows?
Yeah.
Tell me how many of these you watched. Flash Forward?
No.
Kingdom Hospital?
No.
Surface?
No.
The Event?
No.
Invasion?
No. I haven't heard of most of these.
Exactly. 5.
That's a show?
Threshold?
Or is that a number? Okay. No.
Awake?
No.
Journeyman?
No.
Dollhouse?
No.
That's a Joss Whedon show that I didn't watch, but I know it exists. Persons Unknown?
No.
Terra Nova?
No. You're just saying words.
The American remake of Life on Mars?
No. You're just saying words.
Like, I know that Life on Mars was a show, and I know that Dollhouse was a show. I've watched none of these. I've never even if I'd heard of the other ones, they are gone from my mind.
Yeah.
So that's what's interesting, is to say, like, it really changed the landscape. It did. And a lot of things tried to do what Lost did and have zero staying power.
Yes.
Most of the sci-fi shows we now regard as classics are not Lost clones, like these other shows kind of tried to be. I'm guessing, I know nothing about them. Rather, they are straightforward procedural franchises with simple operational themes. And now this is where I was like, oh, this is so true. The brothers Winchester, so they're from Supernatural. Nick Burkhardt and Grimm, which I didn't watch. Mulder and Scully in the X-Files, even Buffy the Vampire Slayer, are all basically cops rolling into a new case week after week, interrogating suspects, finding lore that matches the methodology of the villains, confronting evildoers, serving justice, and moving on to the next week's transgressor, even if they're not cops, right? And Lost doesn't do that.
And honestly, I think that if we're using that framework, Yellowjackets is not trying to do that either. They're trying to follow the Lost template a little bit. Not template, but you know what I mean? They're not doing the procedural, method. And that's why it's become, I think, like we talked about last week with Chris, so hard to find that balance.
Right. But the thing that totally. And it's why I think it's so hard not to compare Yellowjackets to Lost in a way that these other shows don't necessarily need to be. But then the extra layer of this that I think is really fascinating is he says Lost succeeded in telling a longitudinal story because it managed to create a central operational theme for every single one of the characters in its huge ensemble. So even though it's not like the cop structured shows are really easy, right? Buffy is hunting monsters coming out of the Hellmouth. There are things that tie each season together and across that are in the same way that like X-Files has the monster of the week episodes, but then every once in a while you drop into, we call it like the myth arc, the mythology arc of the series.
Yeah.
But Lost kind of doesn't do that, but he argues, and as one of the producers of the show and somebody who was really involved with it early on, says every action on the island present became an attempt to compensate for shortcoming in the past's real world. So their operational themes are how are they handling their past through the way they're enacting, living out their lives on this island. And that's, even though it's so complicated and there's so much going on and so many different characters, that's kind of always at the center. Whether there's a smoke monster, whether there's a polar bear, whether no matter what, you can juxtapose this is what's happening on the island and it's informed by what's happening in the past always. And I think that's something that Orange is the New Black did
later on.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't a sci-fi show, they made a point of connecting past and present for each character in that way.
And I wonder how do we think that shows up? Yeah, good.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think that's why, even though there are lots of Lost detractors that talk about the plot of the show and the way that morphed and evolved over time in an unexpected way, there aren't, that I have seen, lots of complaints about character development and things like that in this show, because I do feel like that is where people got very attached to these characters because they were given a lot of sort of backstory and depth and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's almost a cheat that it's set up through the flashbacks, because it is like a weird, interesting thing to do, to have the show kind of pick up in the middle of things and let the characters do what they're going to do on the island. I think Locke is a great example. When you find out his backstory, you're it changes the way you have thought about him all the way up until that point. You wouldn't have the space or freedom to do that. How would you balance that in a show that doesn't have the parallel timelines running?
Yeah. There's a reason that a lot of shows use that technique. It's kind of necessary in some ways to tell a fuller story without,
especially with an ensemble cast, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we talked through a couple of ways we wanted to frame the pilots generally, things we wanted to talk about for each one and have a consistent thread. So do you want to start us off with that?
Yeah, I think the obvious one is like just what's the hook? What's the sort of elevator pitch, and is it successful? Is it compelling?
Mm-hmm.
So what
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, the hook for me watching this again especially was just like plane crash, mysterious happenings, nobody trusts each other. Are they going to get rescued? If not, how are they going to survive? And what the fuck is happening in the woods? Like, what is the thing that is threatening them?
Yeah, a group of strangers crash on a mysterious island. Will they survive?
Yeah. And how?
And how? Right?
And I think for me, again, I know we said we weren't going to talk so much about the way that this ends up, but as evidenced by my fandom of the History Channel television show alone, I'm a fan of survival stories more than I am a sci-fi person. And so I was super into the human drama and the survivalism of Lost in the beginning. And as it got more and more convoluted and supernatural, I continued to watch it and be interested in it and enjoy it. But it was less my wheelhouse, I guess.
That makes sense. I mean, I love the more convoluted and stupid, and I'm just so open to just let a show do its thing.
Yeah.
The zanier it got, the more fun I had with it. But I know that's a special. So when Geth was on last week and we were talking about Friday Night Lights, and he was like, yeah, you probably would have loved the shark blood. I'm like,
right.
Yeah. But like, so I
think when we're talking about like the scene setting of the pilot and like what's the hook, I think that is partly why some people felt betrayed by the direction that it went, because the scene setting is...
But there is a smoke monster that makes the sound of a taxi cab.
I know. And it's funny because I had forgotten, like we were talking about, how present the supernatural is from day one. Because to me, it was about the crash, the people, their interactions. I think at that point I was like not assuming that it was going to go as supernatural as it did, that there was going to be some logical explanation for what was happening with the quote unquote smoke monster. Because at that time we didn't see it. We didn't know it was like a column of black smoke. Like it was just a mysterious thing crashing around in the woods. And we ended up seeing a polar bear. So like it could easily,
which Charlie tells you, though, that the polar bear is a teeny tiny version of whatever it was that killed the pilot.
But still, like, I feel like in the pilot, it is so plausible that they could come up with a scientific explanation for all of it without it being supernatural. Not that it didn't appear that it could be supernatural, but like if you were someone who wanted it to go in a more scientific direction, there were plenty of moments along the way where they allowed you to go that way.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I do think I think people downplay that it allowed for both. Yeah. And then it made a decision one way or the other for us. Or it actually made a decision in both directions, because some of what's going on the island is very man-made, very like, again, big spoilers, very scientific and very concrete, and some of it is island magic. Some of it is just island magic.
Which is, I think, why people like me were like, just fucking pick one.
Right. Like, and I like that it's a little bit of both. I think that's really cool. And I think it didn't feel like a cop-out or a huge shift to me. I mean, it gets crazier than this would imply, but I don't think the fact of there being a heavy sci-fi element to this show, I don't think that's a betrayal of what was set up at the beginning in the way a lot of people do.
I don't either. I just think that, I mean, this has been discussed to death. We don't need to go into the ending so much, but like, I just feel like they tried to have too many things, too many ways. This is just coming from me being someone who isn't a fan when things get that convoluted, and like, it might just be an attention thing. Like, I just can't. At some point, I'm like, okay, I don't actually care anymore. If you're not going to explain it, I'm not going to look. Like, I get a little wary, or weary. Weary is the right word at the end with this show. But I don't know. I mean, I loved it at the time. It's not like I was somebody who was like, when the finale aired, was like, fuck this show. It was just like, oh, okay. All right. I guess I'm not going to fully understand everything. So.
Yeah.
We wanted to talk also about like, well, we did talk about a bit about how it introduces the characters and the world building that's happening. Was there something we wanted to say about that?
I mean, we think good. In general, just like aside from everything else, we think if you had only seen the pilot, do these characters feel like, for the most part, real people, even if, you know,
I think so. I mean, they're a little stereotypical, like we were talking about, but they're acted very well for the most part. There's a few duds, but
they're just a couple, but I think this cast in general is pretty fantastic.
Absolutely. And so, like if I hadn't seen the rest of this and I was just watching the pilot, I would keep watching. I'd be interested to see where these people go. And they do feel like they have interesting backstories that I would want to know more about.
I agree. And then how do we feel about how this show sets up its world and introduces us? I think this is one of those questions where we can maybe ask that based on just the pilot and then open it up and just kind of point back to what we just talked about, really.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's so interesting because I do think that from the pilot, it sets up the island in two ways, both of which are important to the future of the show. One, as an actual physical location, the way it looks, the limits of it, the, sort of isolation of it, typical crash landing on an island look. And then there's also this feeling that once you get off the beach and into the jungle, that it's convoluted and endless, and there's lots of hidden pockets, and there's lots of like mysteries and like dark woods as far as the eye can see, and like it has that other kind of endless feeling to it that later on comes into play because we find out there's so many little secret hidden areas of it. And I think because of the way it's shot in the beginning, and specifically the scene of them trying to find the cockpit and then trying to find higher ground, it is shot in a way that implies that this place is both isolated and also endless and huge in a way.
Just like weirdly unknowable. Totally.
Yeah.
And also just the, like, Yellowjackets as the point of comparison.
I know.
Of like, there's no rescue here that isn't somebody coming to find them. In which is different from Yellowjackets, where it's like, well, if you guys had started walking when the weather was warm, you might have been home by now. You might have been back in Jersey. Like, who knows?
Right. Yeah. And there are attempts to leave the island repeatedly over the 6 seasons, but it is definitely meant to feel far more out of, like actually far closer to the Andes plane crash in a way, in terms of isolation. Like, because the Andes plane crash was literally in the middle of nothing.
Right.
And like they literally flew over them looking for them and didn't see them because it was just such a wilderness of an isolated place. And so I think in some ways I was mentally connecting it to that plane crash as well. Thinking about like the unlikelihood of rescue in both cases. So
I'm thinking of like a thing that I always go back to, not just with this show, but any show that has any sort of like supernatural or magic or sci-fi, of like, does it set up, I'll believe anything if this is rich coming from me, a Lost defender, but if you set up your rules, as long as you follow your rules, you can do whatever you want. I don't care, and it feels to me like Lost starts here with the like, rules are, there ain't no rules. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, so they I know I'm a defender, but yeah, I feel like Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's the end of my sentence. Is there anything else? Plot, character, setting. Those are the three. Hook, plot, character, setting.
Right.
Like those are the big four
Right.
to me. Is there anything else you can think of that just generally that we're going to want to be looking out for with pilots moving forward?
I mean, the big one for me is because these are generally shows that at least one of us has watched fully.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I think is interesting to me about this conversation is I know we're not talking about finales. There's a show for that. It's called Stick the Landing, and it's on the Rigger Network, and it's great. But one thing about pilots or first episodes is if it is this show that has been given one season, how does the first and last kind of start and end it?
Right.
And then if it's a show that was given 6 seasons, but maybe wasn't prepared for 6 seasons, how does that work out? And then if it's a show that, like, so not to jump ahead, but next week we're going to watch the pilot for 6 Feet Under. And one of the reasons I wanted to watch it after this is because it also had 6 seasons, I believe. Let me just double check that fact. 5. Okay. 5 seasons instead of 6.
How many episodes did it get, though?
63.
Okay.
Shorter seasons, HBO.
Right.
But so part of what ideally you do with a quote unquote prestige TV show is that you have some sort of connection, mirroring something between the pilot and the finale that rewards that the viewer following that arc to the end. Right. And so we've talked plenty about the complaints about Lost, the defense of Lost, the, how it ends versus how it started. One of the things in the ending is you get a very similar, we're not going to spoil everything, but like you get a similar shot of Jack. Right. That kind of mirrors the beginning visually. Right. And so one of the reasons I want to do 6 Feet Under after this is because 6 Feet Under, in the view of many, many, many critics, has one of the best. And when I say best, I mean like most satisfying. To longtime viewers. Right. Endings, finales of a show in this prestige TV era. And so it's interesting to think about why that is and like why that's the consensus. And I'm sure there are people that disagree with that consensus. But, thinking about, so 6 Feet Under is not a show that both of us have watched all of. It's a show that I've watched all of and you've never seen. So it's going to be a little different. We won't both have the full arc of the show in our minds. But
that might be interesting to see.
No, I think it's going to be
hard to talk. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think it's going to be nice to have some variety in terms of who's watched what and how much of it. Because 6 Feet Under, to me, was absolutely my favorite show for a long time. Like at the time it was airing. I waited for it every week. I loved it. There was so much in it that meant so much to me. The characters, their specific trajectories, like really like representation of a gay couple in a way that hadn't been done before. Lauren Ambrose as a redheaded version of me, a college student studying photography. Like there's just so much in it. Sorry, now I'm just talking about why I love 6 Feet Under, but I'm excited for next week now that I'm like thinking about it.
I just thought of something else that maybe we should be, because so much of what we talk about and kind of why we and how we managed to branch out from Yellowjackets in the first place is like influence and impact.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about it with Lost, but there are a couple of things that I think that don't get talked about quite as much because everyone is so invested in what happens with the plot of the show, whether you like it or not. And so just to pull back a little bit, one of the huge things that Lost did was it gave its show an endpoint. Originally, I think they said like our show is 5 seasons or maybe 4. And especially on network TV, like you wanted as many shows as possible, as many episodes as possible. One, because people were watching TV and it made money, but also because it's after 100 episodes, you qualify for syndication.
Yep.
And then you can sell your show to rerun on other channels, right? That's why 2.5 Men is on every channel. And that's why Big Bang Theory is on every channel multiple times a day. And then the original, the people who sell the show make $1 billion.
Yes.
And Lost got 121 episodes, so it certainly qualified. But they originally, before the strike and before the network said, like, oh, the show is actually really successful, you have to figure out a way to make it extend it. They had an original start and end for this show. And that's, that's less unique now.
Right.
I think because of streaming, the way that it's like that a lot of things like syndication just doesn't work the same way. Because, I'm sure it doesn't practice. I just mean, I think there's probably less of a, what's the word? Less of a motivation for it because you don't have to watch everything when it reruns on the CW or whatever.
Yeah, you can just watch it on demand.
Yeah. So I think that's part of it. It's also why seasons were so, and still are for some shows, so long. But one of the reasons that I defend Lost, and then I'll stop defending Lost this week, is that the showrunners had a vision for it to be a little more contained. And then, like I said, when the strike happened, and when the network decided that it wasn't, that it had to be, that they just needed to make more episodes, those two things, you end up with some real rocky stuff in the middle, and also them introducing even more questions and mysteries that they maybe weren't planning on. And all of that is like, how, like, their failure to do that in an elegant way is on them, but the fact of having to do it, I don't think is. And I think there's like shows that has happened for, and I think, again, not to go back to Yellowjackets, I think that's something we worry about a little bit of maybe happening with Yellowjackets.
Yeah.
And I think that was a new problem, and it is one that shows run into a lot now.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and it also is a problem that is created by shows that stray from that sort of procedural model we were talking about, right? Where it's like, instead of kind of having a monster of the week or whatever and having some underlying mythology running through it, the mythology is the show.
Right.
And so people obviously focus on the mythology. So, yeah. And I think, so getting into, actually, I don't want to jump ahead. Do we have other connections or resonances that we want to talk about?
You talked, the one last little category actually that we might want to keep in mind, and you talked about it a little bit when I asked you to kind of like break down what the hook or the whatever the show is, or like what questions are set up, whether they're answered or not, whether they're the only ones or not.
We don't need to,
in this pilot. Maybe Lost wasn't maybe we should have started with something a little cleaner. But it's
I'll make everything else easier from now on.
But it's like you said, what's up with the crash? Who are these people? What are they hiding? What is we call it the smoke monster now. What is the thing in the woods?
Right.
What's up with the polar bear? This is a lot of questions. And I collapsed the what are these people hiding into one, but that's a different question for every single person. Pretty clear. Are
they going to get rescued?
Right. Is this a show about people getting rescued? I think those are the main ones. Oh, who's the French chick, and what's the deal with the French person on the transceiver? Right. That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot, but it's also, I think, for a 6-season show, more than manageable, which I think is why they ended up kind of blowing everything out.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a good way to approach the pilots. Like, what questions are they setting up, regardless of how they answer them or not, but like what are, just from these episodes or this episode, what do we want to know going forward?
Yeah. And not every show we're talking about has a mystery, like a explicit mystery element to it, so there might be less, or the questions will obviously be different,
or more character focused, or whatever.
Exactly. So that's just something to be keeping in mind. I have one other specific to Lost thing that I'm kind of resurrecting from our movies watch. Which is Jersey references.
Oh yes, Jersey Connections. Yeah, no, I'm excited about this. Let's do it.
Okay. I've got one, you've got one.
Yeah.
And then I have a really tiny one.
You go first, because I don't know what yours is.
I'll start. Do you want the tiny one or do you want the good one?
Let's start with the tiny one and then do the good one.
The tiny one is just that. I'm not going to get into this whole backstory. If you know anything about how Lost was made, it's pretty fraught with like the head of ABC getting fired and Lost, his greenlighting of Lost being the final straw. It's like kind of the senior vice president. It's like kind of it's sort of hilarious and sort of sad and whatever. That guy is Lloyd Braun. And he also helped develop The Sopranos. So that's my little Jersey connection. It's just a little one.
That is a little one.
Mm-hmm. Along with David Chase, obviously. He's the big, But yeah.
What's the big one?
J.J. Abrams and Lindelof met backstage at a Bruce Springsteen concert.
Oh, that's perfect.
Isn't that so good?
That's perfect.
Yeah.
That is a really good one. Related to that, mine is that Damon Lindelof was born in Englewood, New Jersey, as was I.
Love it.
And he went to high school in Teaneck, both Bergen County towns.
Now, where's is this Bergen County, you said?
Bergen County,
okay.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
He went to Teaneck High School, and I just found this quote that I thought was really so resonant with our, like, Jersey obsession. He says, Lindelof went to Teaneck High School, a school whose diverse student body he credits with expanding his horizons as a writer. He has stated, I was a Jewish white kid growing up in Teaneck, but at the same time, I had African, Filipino, and Asian friends. And to have that experience all through high school while getting an awesome education was wonderful. So we talk a lot about how people don't realize the sort of racial and ethnic diversity that New Jersey contains, but especially in these like New York City adjacent towns, the immigrant population has done so much to contribute to their vitality. And it is part of the joy of growing up in a place that is that diverse, is like it expands your horizons.
That's such a good point. In the show, we've talked about it kind of dabbling in stereotype.
Yes.
And it's a huge cast, so it's hard not to tokenize any particular race because, or not a huge cast. And the cast is like covering a lot of ground with like, it's a big cast, but it's still only a handful of main players. So it is like, here's your Asian couple.
Yep.
Here's a couple of black characters.
Yep.
Here's a couple of, we got a couple of Australians. I guess we got to count them. But you know what I mean? Like they're kind of mixing it up. So it's hard not to feel like anyone is sort of tokenized, but it is still, there is a plethora of diversity of people on this show in a way that, I'll go back to it again, network television, you had white sitcoms and you had black sitcoms for a very and that was the bulk of it and still is, but it's certainly gotten better.
And all that to say, like, growing up in a racially diverse place doesn't make you automatically racially sensitive. There have been stories about what this writer's room was like that are not so great. I think Lindelof has since commented that he was maybe not the best boss in a lot of ways, that there was some sort of racist shit that happened in the writer's room and on set. So, just because you grow up with different types of people, it doesn't automatically make you sensitive to those people.
Of course, right. But I wonder how much seeing that as your cultural landscape growing up makes you more likely to reflect it in the art you make, even even if you are imperfect in the execution thereof. I don't know.
But to be willing to engage with like the post 9/11 racism against Muslims, like, and against people of Middle Eastern backgrounds, that.
Well, again, we were still really in the thick of it.
Jesus
really
Christ,
in
were
the
we?
thick of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Jersey connection, Bergen County connection. I'm sure there are more
to find out what the 6 Feet Under Jersey connection is.
There's got to be some. There's got to be some. It's filmed in California, but yeah.
Well, Lost was filmed in Hawaii, and we found a few.
Yeah, that's true. So should we just
we'll see you back here next week for technically episode 3 of Lost. Tabula Rasa.
No. No.
This is
absolutely not.
Lost Rewatch podcast. It's called We Have to Go Back.
Nope. We're not doing it. I can't do it. For those people that haven't seen 6 Feet Under, we'll try not to do any like outright spoilers again, but this is a show that's over 20 years old. We're not going to censor ourselves either. Brief synopsis of the show itself. Laced with irony and dark situational humor, the show approaches the subject of death through the eyes of the Fisher family, who owns and operates a funeral home in Los Angeles. Peter Krause stars as Nate, who reluctantly becomes a partner in the funeral home after his father's death. In terms of structure, this is something of a procedural with an ongoing plot of the family underneath it, because every week it starts with a death. And the pilot starts with the death of the father that kicks off this whole thing. So structurally, I think it's really interesting because this pilot, when you think about how a pilot sets up a show, it's not just setting up like open questions and set and setting. It's also setting up structure that will continue to repeat itself throughout the series. But it's separated here by it's a family death versus like a death that they're dealing with in the funeral home.
That's cool. Interesting.
Yeah, it's an amazing show. You can find it online in a number of places. I think it's on Netflix. And let's see, where can we watch? 6 Feet Under streaming. I just looked it up and then I lost it. It's available on Netflix, Amazon Prime, Max, Hulu with, I think, a Max subscription. It's all over the place.
Okay, good.
So should not be difficult.
I'm so excited. I know this is one of those shows that like I just haven't watched yet.
You
but
would have loved.
Yeah, I'm so ready.
You would have loved. It's got so much dark humor in it. It's so like progressive for the time in a way that's really interesting, on queer things and on like just I don't know. It's such a fantastic show. And of course we have our Yellowjackets connection with our Lauren Ambrose as a 20-something.
I can't wait.
So this was when I first fell in love with Lauren Ambrose.
She's so good.
Yeah.
Can't hardly wait as my in with her. So I have love for her too, even though you've spent much more time with her than I have. All right.
Cool.
That's it, right?
I think so. That is, I hope this felt good to you to talk about Lost and not too frustrating.
For
especially
me,
that we're
I
not
was
going to
like,
continue to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I love any chance to be able to talk about my show. I will say too, I think I'm such a big Lost defender as like an equal and opposite reaction to other people. Kind of the way we started with Yellowjackets of being like, I don't want to hear any criticism. I understand that there are issues with that show, but it is just in the same way that like parents can only see the best in their children. That's how I feel about Lost. So
yeah,
you didn't say anything that I was, that I won't recover from.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, come back with us next week and we'll talk 6 Feet Under. I am so excited. I'm so excited. You can find us on Instagram at WatchersPodNJ. You can email us at watcherspodnj@gmail.com. Make suggestions for other pilots or other shows that you love.
Or other criteria. I think like if there's something we missed where you're like, well, what about this like I would be interested to know. And we have, I think, about 8 or so that we have already decided for sure we want to do and are open to other ideas. Andrea, where can they find you? Oh, I'm at AQ Andrea Q. And you can find me on Instagram at Jodie_Mim, JODIE_MIM. And we will see you in California. Okay. Next week. That place is fine. I'll go to California. I mean, we could say, like, we'll see you in the morgue, but that's... Say that. Rough. All right. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye. We'll see you in the morgue.